This is MacVoices TV. Welcome to MacVoices TV. This is the talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, if you are a MacVoices TV subscriber, then you know this is part 2 of a conversation with Jeff Carlson about 2 different new and very diverse books he has authored. In part 1, we talked about his Meet the iPad and iOS 5 from Peachpit Press, an ebook designed for those of you new to the iPad. This time, though, we're going to talk to Jeff about his new Photoshop Elements 10 for Windows and Mac OS 10 Visual QuickStart Guide, also from Peachpit. Jeff, welcome back. For most people, it's going to be a little while. For you and I, it's just a few minutes.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Jeff, Photoshop Elements 10, I have to tell you that anytime a program gets beyond about version 4 or 5, I start to look at it suspiciously and say, But Elements has gone through a lot of changes. It's become it was designed to make Photoshop functionality more approachable, and it seems to do that better with each iteration. Do you think that's true of this iteration, Photoshop Elements 10?
Yeah, I think for the most part. A lot of the changes in this version are more geared toward the organizer, and if you use the organizer for managing your digital library, there's some interesting features there. I think it still has all of the same photo editing power that the last version did, and so I think for someone who perhaps has been using iPhoto for a while and wants to do more complicated or more exhaustive edits than what iPhoto allows, Photoshop Elements is the next logical step up.
Okay, the organizer.
Okay.
This is great because I do firmly believe that this is a problem that more and more people are having, because we've had digital cameras in our hands now for a while, but now we have iPhones and iPads, and everything has a camera on it. And interestingly now, most of these devices have a really good camera on it. So we're more inclined to use them. And that means if we use them, we're taking more pictures, and they end up on our Macs, our iPads. In this case, we're talking about our Macs, usually to edit and to then organize and figure out how we're going to use them. How do you feel about the organizer, and maybe is it fair to compare and contrast it to the iPhoto library or an Aperture library?
I think it's fair to compare. I think that it definitely has some areas that let's for example take one of the new features. One problem with having a large library is that you have a lot of images, and how do you find images in your library? So one way is you can tag them with keywords and organize them into albums and things like that. But that sometimes takes a bit of work. Sometimes all you want to do is you want to find all the pictures of a person, and one of the things that the organizer in Elements 10 does, it will let you find photos that are similar to one another. So, for example, let's say you want to find, let's say you were out on the ocean on a boat, and you could probably try to find it by date, but maybe you had some other photos taken at the same time that weren't when you were out on the boat. Maybe it was when you were on the mainland. I'm just making this example up as you go along, as you can tell. And so, you really just want to look at the shots that are you on the boat. So what you can do is you can find one of those, and then basically ask Elements to search for photos that are similar. And what it will do is it'll come up, and most likely it will bring up photos that have water, or blue horizon line, or shots of a boat, and you can set a slider that says, I want to look for similar things based on color or more based on shape. And so, like, just by specifying that you want to do the search and then dragging a slider, it lets you, immediately narrow down, out of, like, let's say you have, thousands of images in your library, the, 20 or 30 you took while you were on the boat at that time. It also has the capability of finding specific objects. So, let's say, this is an example that Adobe used in their demo that comes first to mind. But let's say you want to find all the pictures of your dog. Well, you can get a good picture that has your dog's face, and draw a little selection box around the dog's face, and then have it search for similar things, have it search for similar objects, and so it will come up with all of the photos that have the dog in it, even if they're not like from the same time period or the same color or whatever. So like that's a handy thing to do. Another reason I thought of that is because when Apple and Adobe first came out with their people recognition, their facial recognition features, I was surprised at how many people asked, well, will it recognize my dog or my cat or my favorite pet? And those algorithms don't really work for that. But this, you're defining a shape, and in this case, it's it's a shape that's got ears on top of the head, and dog shape.
Wait a minute! I think we just coined a new technical term: dog shape.
Dog shape. So, and it'll find those, and then you can edit them or group them or do whatever. So it's sort of yet another way to not be faced with just this overwhelming number of images that you have to slog through. It's using computing power and and software and algorithms to help you speed up your search to find what it is that you're looking for.
I hadn't even thought about the fact that this compares to faces. But that's exactly what it is. Take the same technology, it just lets you define things maybe a little more, and I can see how that would be very handy. Mm-hmm. Does it help you with the management of files, not just from finding things like that, but also like iPhoto or Aperture grouping, allowing you to group them into events or albums or that kind of thing?
Yeah. I personally find Elements to be a little rudimentary in this aspect. Maybe that's not the right word. You can definitely assign keywords and use other metadata, the information that's written to each photo. So, for example, you can create smart albums that, if you wanted to, you could say, just show me all the images that were from this week that were shot with my Canon G12, and in fact, Elements has a lot of it's not new in 10. It was new in 9, I believe. It will analyze your photos and pick out characteristics such as whether something is blurry or overexposed or underexposed. So you could build a smart album that says, show me all the photos that I took with my G12 last week that are not blurry. And so, that way you get, again, more of the photos that you're actually looking for and fewer of the ones that, are, maybe, your hand moved when you took the picture, or, you had the wrong settings on your camera or whatever. So it's very powerful in that way. My hang up is that, and this might just be sort of a geeky thing where if you want to assign keywords in Aperture or Lightroom or iPhoto, it's a lot easier to just sort of like type in your keywords and have them be assigned. Whereas here, you sort of create keywords as like little icons that you can then drag onto. There's some workarounds for that, but in general, like it's still possible. It still gives you that capability to, add all sorts of information about your photos that make it easier for you to find them later.
Jeff, when Photoshop Elements came out, again, I think I said part of this at the top of the show, it was sort of built as a way to, number one, make some quality image editing software much more affordable than Photoshop Elements. Two, it was also designed to make it a little more accessible. We all know that Photoshop itself can be bent to your will if you're willing to put the time and effort and frankly, a whole lot of learning into it. Elements makes a lot of that more approachable. Okay, so then we had something interesting happen, and it was called the iPad. And the iPhone to a lesser degree, but especially the iPad, where you could have photos, you could take photos with these devices, edit them right on the device, and edit them using this.
Right. Usually
in a very intuitive way. In the last show, I know you mentioned PhotoGene and one other program whose name escapes me.
Snapseed.
Snapseed, as two of the current top-of-the-line iPhone and iPad photo editing pieces of software. Mm-hmm. So I guess where I'm going with all this is in that world where this exists and where you have very intuitive tools, how does Elements play into this? Is it for the more serious hobbyist who wants to do things? Does it really does it mimic or get close to the approachability of what we're seeing on the iPad this time on your desktop?
Yes and no, which is a nice overall question.
Nice hedge.
Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. No. I mean, an interesting thing about Photoshop Elements is that it really does cater to a broad spectrum of different users. So, the tools on the iPad and also things like iPhoto, you're basically making adjustments to the entire image, which I think 95% of the time that's really all you want to do. You're trying to maybe sharpen the image or bring back the contrast or whatever. Photoshop Elements has the capability, because it has a lot of the Photoshop CS tools, to make a selection. So you can select one object in the foreground and make adjustments just to that. So, for example, a really easy example, let's say you've taken a photo and it's somebody at sunset, and your sunset looks beautiful, but the person in the foreground is a little bit too dark. If you've taken that with even a halfway decent digital camera, there are ways that you can pull a lot of that brightness and detail out. But usually, if you do that to the entire image, then the background's gonna get too light or get blown out in some areas. So in Photoshop Elements, you can bring that photo in, just select the person in the foreground, and increase the exposure or the brightness just on them, and get a more balanced image. So that's one end of the spectrum where you're actually using selection tools to do that, and then making adjustments. It's very powerful. You have layers and layer masks, so you can apply different settings and have them not change the pixels in your original image. So you're actually doing non-destructive editing. It's very, very powerful. Now, that sort of assumes that you know how to do all that. Let's say you don't know how to do all that. You don't really want to know how to do all that. So, I mean, it's, it very much falls into the category of, you shouldn't have to be a computer expert to do all this stuff. If you are, that's great. If you're not, there's a guided edit mode that has a bunch of different situations, common editing situations, that it steps you through. So, for example, I'll use a slightly different example to point to a new feature in 10. There's a guided edit that lets you change the blurriness of an image. So, one of the things that looks good in some images is to have like your foreground to be nice and sharp, and then your background to be blurry, so that you're just sort of getting a texture, and it's giving more emphasis on your foreground image. Excuse me. So this new guided edit will let you either sort of select an area in the middle, and then everything else gets blurred out, or you can select make a selection to keep that part in focus, and then the rest of it gets blurry. If you were to do that in the full editing, it would take a few steps. In the guided edit, you're literally like following, all right, step 1, choose the amount of blurring. Step 2, do this. And so you don't have to be an expert. You just have to follow the steps that it tells you to get the result that you want. So, and then there's an even more basic editing mode that just really has sort of iPhoto type sliders that say just make my image better, do a smart adjustment, and let the computer figure it out. So no matter where you are on that spectrum, and even if you are an expert and you don't want to put in a whole lot of time to tweak it, you can use the other modes to do something more quickly and still get a great result.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that the learning curve here is, it's obviously not what full Photoshop is, but it can almost be as shallow or as steep as you wish it to be, depending on whether you want to learn how to do a lot of this stuff or let the program guide you through it. And if you have to do it 40 times, let it guide you 40 times. And that way you don't really, obviously you're going to learn something after 40 times, hopefully.
Right.
But that's really encouraging, because there's so many of these cool effects that it becomes a little frustrating, because I don't want to spend a lot of time. That's not the kind of photographer I am. Once in a while, I find a photo I want to tweak. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the other thing that Photoshop is notorious for is not just enhancing photos, but performing magic on them. Taking people out and closing gaps and turning a tree into a girl. It's kind of amazing. How much of that can you accomplish in Elements using its building capabilities and not have to be a Photoshop whiz?
All right. I'm going to say something very surprising, which it's actually easier to do stuff like that in Elements than it is in the full-blown Photoshop for some of those things, because the engineers at Adobe, let's say, for example, you want to there's a great feature that, let's say you're on vacation and you are standing in front of some monument or whatever, and you take a few different pictures, and then you get back and you realize that there's a hot dog vendor that walked behind you, or something that's otherwise distracting in the image. So there's a Adobe calls them photo merge. There's a photo merge feature that will let you take 3 or 4 pictures that you shot, and hopefully you just shot a bunch in quick succession, and it will take pieces of each photo to remove aspects out of your main photo. And so it'll take those pixels where the wall behind you is blank, whereas in the shot that you like, where where you're smiling the best, you might have the person standing over here. Then you might have another shot where the person's here and then the person's over here, then you can, basically take one of the empty portions of the other shots and add it to your shot. So that's something you could totally do with layers and such in Photoshop. You can do it manually if you want, but use this photo merge. All you have to do is say, okay, in this picture, I want this object gone, and it does it. Like, that's it. Boom. So a lot of things like that are actually easier in Photoshop Elements because the people at Adobe have really looked and said, okay, like what are the pain points? What are people running into in their images that we can fix because we have all this computational ability. Another very cool feature is it's called it flew out of my head. Wow, I do not remember what the feature name is. Basically, it's a smart way of doing corrections. So, like, let's say you are again, you're on vacation. This is a great vacation, apparently, and you take a picture in front of some monument, and there's some graffiti on the wall, and you didn't really realize that then because you were looking at how great the monument was or the the scenery or whatever. But when you get back and you're looking at your pictures, you notice oh, there's some squiggle or something on the brick. You can actually take your I've forgotten the name, but your correction brush. See, this is one of the problems of being an author, where like you have to know all the names of the details.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many brushes in any of the Adobe programs.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, you take the brush that has the little Band-Aid icon. That's what I'll work with right now, and you just paint over that graffiti, and it will intelligently replace that with the background that surrounds it. So it's sort of like using the cloning tool, where you would sort of say, like, take a little bit of this part of the wall and this part of the wall and paint it here to kind of patch over that. It's sort of like doing that, but all you have to do is just make one swipe with this brush, and it fixes it. And so you're able to take advantage of a lot of that processing technology without having to know the underlying technology, the underlying steps to do it.
And
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and I think that's what a lot of us are looking for. We bow to the Photoshop gods, but we don't want to become one because there's just too much effort involved.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm not going to work with this stuff every day.
Right. Well, and another advantage is that if you are using one of those guided edits where it's walking you through, sometimes it's good to use that as a starting point, because if you switch from your guided edit mode into the full edit mode, you will see that the corrections that it's made are saved as layers that you can then go and tweak or fix however you want. So you can let elements do a lot of the sort of mundane starting work and then fine tune it the way you want it.
Jeff, I know that you didn't just update the book for the new capabilities of Elements 10, but you also spent some time reorganizing it to maybe make it a little more approachable. And this is the part where we say this is a visual QuickStart guide, which is just that. It's visual. It shows you what to do, and it's designed to help you get up and running with the key features, the core features, as quickly as possible. What kind of enhancements did you make to the book for Elements 10?
Well, a few things, and I'll step back a little bit by saying the way a book tends to evolve is, a long time ago, you wanted a book that just sort of covered everything. And so, it didn't really necessarily matter in what order or, how it was presented. Like, you just want to be able to find it. And I think the previous editions of this book had started to get a little bit crusty in that regard. And so what we wanted to do, my editor and I, was, really sort of provide something that, someone has just bought the book and they want to, they want to get up and running fast. It's a 400-page book. And so, like, nobody is going to sit down and, all right, I have some photos to edit, and in 7 days after I read the book, I will know everything. Like, that just doesn't happen. So what I did was I added a brand new chapter that just it's like here are 5 steps to get you started on editing any kind of image. Like, follow these 5 steps and you will import your photos, correct them, and, share them with somebody. So there's that. We split out cropping and straightening images into their own chapter because, to my surprise, like one of the top search requests at Adobe, people want to know how to crop their images so that they can, recompose, what's there. And like that information was there in the book, but it was elsewhere in sort of your general editing stuff. So we did that, and then just because so many cameras, even consumer cameras now, shoot in Camera Raw, I expanded the Camera Raw section into its own chapter and went into a lot more detail about what happens when you are editing Camera Raw photos, because in Photoshop Elements, when you open a Camera Raw image, you basically get a separate program that comes up that is the Adobe Camera Raw application that has a bunch of different options that you can use before you even get to the editor in Elements. And so, in many cases, you might just want to say, okay, yeah, here it is. Let's move on because I want to do stuff in Elements. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do with Camera Raw, such as changing the white balance, that will make it easier for you to do other types of edits when you're actually in Elements. So those are some examples of kind of restructuring the book and updating it for how people are taking photos and working with photos now versus a few years ago.
That's a really interesting statement, because people are taking photos differently and they're paying more attention. I think there are more people. I'm not always one of them, but I think there are more people that want to play with this stuff, and they do see what can be done. They see the demos and think, gee, I'd like to learn how to do that. And Elements lets them learn how to do that without having to spend the time or the money to go to a day-long or 2-day-long seminar. I mean, if you're going to be a professional, that's great. But if you're snapping pictures of the kids after the football game or at a picnic or at the holidays, it's another option here that you just want to get it done and move on.
Yeah, exactly. And to pump up my book some more too, it does go into a lot of the higher end detail too. I mean, like as a quick example, let's say for whatever reason your camera tends to produce images that are like a little washed out. Then you can set a Camera Raw setting so that everything that comes through automatically has an increased vibrance setting, which basically boosts the color saturation without and it retains skin tone so that people don't turn into yellow Oompa Loompas, orange Oompa Loompas. I have to get my Willy Wonka coloring correct. And so if you find yourself that, like every single time I open a photo, I have to like adjust the vibrance, or the sharpening or whatever. Like it says how to set that up so that like that's automatically applied, so you don't have to continually do that, and you can then and if you need to dial it back, that's fine. But if that's a common thing with your camera, you can easily work around that, and again, let the software do it. Like let the like use all that computing power that you have at your disposal for good, rather than just having it wasted.
So basically, this book makes an approachable program even more approachable and helps you get more out of it.
Yeah, and it's a visual quick start guide, so that means everything is step by step. Everything's step by step. There's a great index, so you can look up things. You don't have to read it cover to cover, and like everything is there, so that you don't have to fumble with it, or like the last thing that I would ever hope anybody does is like fight with the book while they're trying to fight with the program. And so just put in a lot of thought and time into like how can we present this so that what I'm imparting is, I don't know, like fluid, so that you're not you're picking up the information and using it to actually do what you want to do, rather than trying to figure out like, what is he talking about here. So
yeah, and that's a place where I think traditionally most computer manuals, if your program still comes with a manual, they fall down a little bit, because they're written by people who are much more technically oriented instead of task oriented, or oriented. They want to go, okay, this is feature 1, this is feature 2, this is feature 375, and by the time you get to 4, you're bored. And the way you approach it is, okay, I have this picture, this is what I want to do to it, this is how I get it done, and it's just a whole different, better way of approaching that particular task.
Yeah, I would like to think so. And the book's in full color too, so you're not having to sort of imagine how how the settings that I've described will work. Like, you can see it right there. You can see that when you apply vibrance, it brings out the colors and leaves the skin tones intact. When you apply just saturation, you end up with great backgrounds and a yellow person. So it's that, like, you can see right away what I'm talking about.
So this book is, and I keep having to check to make sure I get the full title right.
I know, because because apparently I can't write books that don't have 10-word titles.
That's okay. So you can count the words, folks, but this is Photoshop Elements 10 for Windows and Mac OS 10 Visual Quick Start Guide by Mr. Jeff Carlson from Peachbit. Jeff, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for giving us a walk through this. I'm looking forward to picking the book up and learning how to do a little more than I already know how to do with Elements, because there's some of those cool features that just have eluded me. But I'm sure under your tutelage, I'll figure it out.
Good. I look forward to, I hope you have fun with the book, because it's fun to write about this stuff, because it's what I do with digital photos and everything too. So I want people, I'm sounding needy, I want you to enjoy it, please enjoy it. But that's the point. Otherwise we don't want to subject ourselves to boring stuff. So
no, well, we're Mac. Well, I know this is for the Windows people, but we won't talk about them. We're Mac users. We want to have fun.
Exactly.
Folks, this is MacVoices TV. Please visit our website at macvoices.tv. I'll have links in the show notes to everything that Jeff does when he's not authoring a whole lot of books. And, of course, I'll have links in to the book itself and to everything we talked about. Jeff, we'll do it again soon. Thanks so much for taking the time to do 2 MacVoices TV shows. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I'm Chuck Joyner. As always, thanks for watching.
MacVoices TV is part of the MacVoices Group and a member of Mac Level 10.